We need the wall. The Border Patrol, ICE, they all want the wall. We stop the drugs. We shore up the border. One of my first acts will be to get all of the drug lords, all of the bad ones. We have some bad people in this country that have to go out. We're going to get them out. We're going to secure the border. And once the border is secured, at a later date, we'll make a determination as to the rest.
Donald Trump returning to the issue of border security and illegal immigration. It differentiated him in that big field of Republican candidates. And last night in the final presidential debate of the 2016 campaign here, will that issue, or was that issue perhaps his strongest card in last night's debate? Let's discuss that now with a trio of radio titans from the talk radio genre. First, joining us from his studio down in San Antonio, Joe Pags, who you see weeknights here with a simulcast 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And from Boston, it's the host of the eponymously named Howie Carr Show. You see Howie via simulcast here on Newsmax weekdays at 4 o'clock Eastern. And from the Big Apple, New York City, radio host Curtis Sliwa of 77 WABC. Gents, we appreciate your time. Joe Pags, I used to represent Arizona. You're down there deep in the heart of Texas. Is the immigration issue the one that will carry the day for Donald Trump in the Lone Star State?
Well, it's really what gave him his start. It's really why he got all the attention in the beginning. Saying that he would build a wall, saying that he'd make Mexico pay for it really resonated with a lot of people. And when you have the Border Patrol and Immigrations and Customs Enforcement backing you, you must be saying the right things. There's a major problem with the border. And it's interesting in Texas, and maybe you find the same thing in Arizona. You've got a lot of people who think, they're just people, they're family members, they're community members, they're productive. Why kick them out? Why do anything?
Joe Pags.
The bottom line is, yes, build the wall. Yes, talk about the border. Yes, talk about our own sovereignty and pride in our nation. And going back to that last night made a lot of sense.
Howie Carr, I can recall doing almost town hall radio shows with you in Boston. You would have huge crowds, and they would react most passionately to talk about border security and illegal immigration, despite the leftists that permeate Boston. Is this still an issue that cuts across party lines and redounds to Trump's benefit?
Absolutely, JD. I say every state is a border state now with the illegal immigration. And, Donald Trump understands that. He spent a lot of time in New Hampshire this year. And he talks about the fact that all the drugs that are involved in the opioid epidemic in New England and all the other states are basically being sold predominantly by illegal aliens, and that it's part of the problem. They're coming across the wide open borders. And I thought it was very effective last night when Chris Wallace brought up the WikiLeaks. Where Hillary Clinton says to the Brazilian bankers she wants open borders, and you knew what her comeback was going to be because her campaign has already done it. That she was only talking about energy. I mean, it's preposterous on its face, and everybody knew it. But
you see there, JD and Howie, that it was incumbent upon Chris Wallace to pin her up against the ropes. He let her spin out and talk about Vladimir Putin. What the hell does Vladimir Putin have to do with illegal immigration and her wet dream, the Hillary Rodham Clinton wet dream, that there'll be open borders in North America and free trade? Chris should have been all over her and said, Madam Secretary, answer the question. This is not about Putin. We'll get to Putin later on. For some reason, he just let her spin out. She did a pirouette, and she was on to Putin.
Yeah, but the one thing I will say for Trump in that situation, he was willing to contrast where he stands, pointing out where Hillary is. Here's the way it went down last night.
She wants open borders. People are going to pour into our country. People are going to come in from Syria. She wants 550% more people than Barack Obama. And he has thousands and thousands of people. They have no idea where they come from. And you see, we are going to stop radical Islamic terrorism in this country. She won't even mention the words, and neither will President Obama.
And Joe Pags, when Donald Trump pointed out the number of Syrian refugees that would come in, the facial expression of Mrs. Clinton could only be described as a smirk. Now, our British cousins in the Daily Mail were saying those facial expressions could hurt her in the final analysis for the election. Is that over-analysis, or is there something to the lurking smirk on the part of Secretary Clinton?
No, I think there's something to it. She did that a lot. She rehearsed her lines, obviously. She was reading something off of her paper in front of her to give her the bullet points, and she was smirking and smiling oddly at weird points, you know, here and there. I mean, I'll try to do it if I can. I'm not really sure what it was. It was this fake, and no matter what the topic was, she would put on this smile as if that was somehow to denigrate or belittle what Donald Trump was saying. And to Curtis's point, she diverted, I mean, better than a running back in the NFL. It was unbelievable how she was going left and going right and going in the middle and avoiding everything. When it was brought up about the WikiLeaks dump, she didn't deny that they were real. In fact, she basically said, well, yeah, they're authentic, but I'm not going to talk about it. Then she would move on to something else. And Chris Wallace did let it happen.
Well, you know something, that look on her face reminded me of, remember Ralph Cramden, Jackie Gleason in The Honeymooners, how he'd have that smug look on his face? Every time she had that smug look, I was thinking Ralph Cramden, The Honeymooners, Jackie Gleason.
Hillary as Ralph Cramden. What about that, Howie?
I just wish that that Donald Trump had come back to her at one point when she did keep pivoting back to the Russians stole this, it's it's state espionage, all that. And I wish Donald Trump had said, "Hey, you're the one who had the reset button with them." You know, I mean, your boss Obama told Mitt Romney 4 years ago, the 80s called Governor Romney. They want their foreign policy back when Romney was saying the Russians were our greatest geopolitical foe. I mean, everything is turned on its head now, and she's trying to make an issue out of where the WikiLeaks came from, and it's just I don't think anybody cares. I mean, the important thing is what's in those. There's an old saying in law. If a lawyer has if you have the law, you pound the law. If you have the facts, you pound the facts. If you don't have the law or the facts, you pound the table. And that's what she was doing last night. She was pounding the table. Oh, the Russians gave all this stuff to WikiLeaks. Who cares?
There was something.
And to that end,
go ahead.
if I may, to that end, the biggest pivot of the night was when Chris Wallace asked her about the Clinton Foundation and whether or not this was pay to play. And she did not even think about addressing the actual question, went on about Putin and about WikiLeaks and about the authenticity and so on and so forth. And she did not answer the question at all. Had he gone back at her and said, and he tried to, I mean, to his credit, he says, but what about pay to play? That's what we're talking about. He calls it pay to play. Did this happen where people, and she completely ignored it. So to me, there's an admission that they're authentic. There's an admission that pay to play happened, and I'm not going to talk about it. I think that was a huge loss for her last night.
But I got to tell you, JD, he ran out of gas. I mean, this is a guy who didn't bone up, who didn't rest up. He was going out, doing stand-up in Green Bay and Colorado Springs. By the end of the debate, he was laying up on the podium. You saw his big fat tuchus in the rear. He was out of gas. I mean, these were heavyweight championship fights, and Donald Trump just did not take them seriously. He really let a lot of us down out there by not coming in there fully prepared to deal with somebody who's been through this before.
As I pointed out last night, preparation prevents a poor performance, and yet this is something, and gents, we may have talked about it before. Let me credit John Gizzi, our Newsmax Washington bureau chief. John points out, he goes back to Ross Perot, calls it the billionaire's curse. In '92, once Ross got past his flip charts, he was kind of off in his own world. Now Trump has hit some responsive keys and chords, and we're all in this business where we have to be glib and have the snappy rejoinders. But I guess my question is this. He didn't quite have the performance he needed, or did he? We heard where Curtis stands on this. Joe and Howie, I'd like to hear from you.
No, I don't think he had the performance he needed. Howie. I mean, other than the rigged, the problem is this whole thing about rigged elections. I mean, that was where he fell down. I mean, it was like 40 seconds out of 90 minutes, but you knew immediately that it gave the mainstream media just the peg they needed to not report on any of the other drawbacks that we've been talking about with Hillary. I mean, JD, you went to candidate school, I'm sure. And I think one of the things they tell candidates at any boot camp for people who want to be politicians is don't answer hypothetical questions, correct?
Yeah,
I mean, that was a hypothetical question.
Well, you try to use humor, too, and that was lacking last night, but I guess it's the import of the debate. Joe Pags, final word to you on your assessment overall, about 30 seconds.
I'm actually on the opposite side of Curtis. I think that Donald Trump came in lackluster. I thought that he didn't have a lot of energy in the beginning. I thought that he really kicked it in. To Howie's point, the mainstream media is never going to take Donald Trump's side no matter what he did last night. I think the man won the last two debates. I think that he did very well for himself in exposing her and bringing up the WikiLeaks stuff and bringing up the open borders and so on. I think that it was okay for him last night. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we got a long way left. Gentlemen, we thank you very much for your take on last night. Coming back with last night's greatest hits as we continue here on Newsmax Prime.